All right, welcome, Darlene. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Darlene, we met up. You are a psychologist, a coach. Tell us more about what you do. Tell us who you are.
I'm a registered social worker, and
Gotcha.
yeah, in Canada. So here in the States, you call them licensed social workers, and we have registered social workers. So I'm registered in Canada, and I'm a coach, and I work with high achieving women.
Mm, okay. And tell us more about that. What does that mean?
Well, I've been working in several different areas throughout my career. My career as an adult, let's say, and I started in corporate for a few years of my life in my early 20s. And then I went into nonprofit and I worked in a variety of different areas in nonprofit. I worked with folks with disabilities, with intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities. I worked on crisis lines. I've worked in mentorship programs. I've been on boards of different nonprofits. I've worked in child welfare. I've been a foster parent of high risk teens. And in all of this, I have decided to branch out on my own. So I did that a few years ago. And it was more of a consulting business when I had started. So consulting folks and working with their families and working within systems that are difficult to maneuver at times. I work from an anti oppressive framework. So, working with folks who don't understand systems is something that is a passion of mine. And that has then moved into the coaching that I've done. So, working with high achieving women, because I'm passionate about working with women and the systems that have oppressed women for so long still exist in all of our societies across the globe. So, it's an area that I'm extremely passionate about. And I love working with folks who are at a high level or want to achieve a high level and are committed to doing the work they need to get there.
Mm, wow. Tell us more. So, to be clear, registered social worker, do you call the work you do therapy?
Sometimes I go back and forth. So I'll go back
Okay.
and forth from therapy to coaching. So I work with a variety of different techniques that I've used over the years. And some of them are really getting into deep barriers and traumas that folks have faced throughout the years that they've, been around. And that could be work related. Most often it's personal things happening in their lives beyond their control at this time, or when they were a child, or when they were a teenager, or any time in their life. So I like to help folks pinpoint what it is, that barrier is that's holding them back from where they want to be. So it could be communication, it could be being misunderstood, constantly being misunderstood by the folks that they're around. So communication maybe has been a barrier for them in the past. They haven't had good role models as caregivers. There's a variety of, as you know, there's a variety of issues why folks are held back by the barriers that they face in their lives.
Sure. Well, something that not too many people know about me is that I actually spent a few years in the social work field as well, particularly with juvenile sex offenders. And working with them has given me a whole lot of empathy towards families that just a handful of bad decisions can really change the trajectory of a young person's life. But by the same token, why we have social workers like you and coaches is we can also make those decisions to change our trajectory. So let me ask you, when did the coaching part come in for you?
You know, it started honestly, it started with friends who were finding that they were getting stuck in the same place in their intimate relationships or their familial relationships or in their jobs. So the question kept coming up, why do I keep getting into the same pattern? Why does, when this happens in my job, why am I so triggered? So in my personal relationships, that's where it started coming up. And I started just talking to friends as I would when we support the people that we care about on in a way that's just genuine and um, in a regular conversation. So that's how it started. And then I started putting myself out there as friends were saying, oh, I know this person who's dealing with this. Oh, this person needs help with this. Are you able to help? And I would do that again, just as a friend, as a favor to a friend. And then it started to become more of something that I did as as part of a job.
Gotcha. And what distinctions do you make between, okay, we're going to step into therapy mode right now, or we're going to step into coaching mode for a given part of a conversation with a client?
You know, I think it's a lot of what you do when you're speaking on your podcast and like you're talking about in your experience, in your past experience, is we have it. I think that both are intertwined with listening and having empathy and really being there and holding space for somebody when they're going through that piece that's really difficult, and then helping them bridge what it is that's happened to them in their lives or what they're going through at that time, and to help with steps that they can take. So asking a lot of questions, holding space, and really being non-judgmental.
Mm. I, excuse me, I bring all this up to say there can be a lot of friction, especially in a corporate environment, to discuss coaching, because sometimes it can feel a little bit like therapy. And now we're thinking, well, do we go through insurance to get this, or what's where do we draw the line on all
That's
of this?
that's a good question. Well, because I am registered in Canada, folks who do hire me in Canada can go through that insurance, like go through insurance to pay for my services. However, it's mostly it mostly is seen as coaching. And we have so many we have so many bridges like this where, yeah, when is it coaching? When is it therapy? But we all are human, and the good, or the, I shouldn't say good, the really progressive corporations out there do see coaching as a valuable resource for the folks on their executive team. And I'm finding this and hearing about it, we read about it all the time, that this is an area where people can talk to somebody who's outside of the organization and really, dive into those areas where they need that support, somebody who's non-judgmental. And and more I'm seeing anyway, more and more corporations and organizations are really looking for those soft skills, and for their leadership team to be more soft. And with that, this is when they are looking for the support for their management team, for their executive team, for folks who they see as leaders in their organizations and want them to move up at some point. So they want people to soften. We don't want that old culture of, many people, many organizations don't want that old culture of like robotics and work like this, and no flexibility. And we just see it more and more. And maybe you are too. Are you seeing as well that organizations and corporations are seeking those soft skills for people to be more genuine and authentic in their work?
I would say yes. And there's a transition phase. I think a lot of this is cultural, and the more people talk about it, there's more momentum behind it. And while there may be management teams that say it, there may be a CEO that wants it, they're not always clear on how to actually get it. And so being a clear communicator as a coach, as a service provider, has been of utmost importance to me, at least, and making sure that they understand we want to move away from this kind of behavior, this kind of culture, what we reward, what we punish within the organization, and we want to move towards this. But let me ask you, how do you see having that neutral third party, that support, actually being the answer to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's a big piece, right? So if they are moving and this is their first step, okay, we want this, but we kind of don't believe it yet, or we have no clue how to get there. That is really tricky. And as we're working along with folks and how do we keep them with that, I in that thinking of this is what you want, it's what I find is bringing folks back to it constantly, right? Like even with myself, when I feel with my family in some way, my old patterns coming in where I'm, black or white, yes or no, I like taking that step back and remembering what my goal is here. It's not to be the authoritative, person in the room in whatever manner that is with my family or, folks in these situations or in these organizations. And reminding them in a soft manner, because when we feel like we're being cornered and questioned, oh, remember how you wanted this, people might feel that way. So feeling out the room, feeling out the where people are at, and coming up with a way that's going to work, that's going to allow them to not feel threatened by the question, and bringing it back to that. And one of the best ways to do that is by having a relationship with people. So not just going in and coaching and just being there and reminding them, but having that continual conversation and really developing a relationship with this team and with those people as individuals that you're working with on an individual basis, so they don't feel threatened. So they know that you're just coming back to them to remind them why it is you're here and why it is that they hired you to be here. Relationship is key in any situation, and sometimes we can say things to folks, and you would know this, like in your relationships with friends, with partners, with whomever, that we can say things that are kind of racy, and they know that you're not there to insult them, that we're
Sure.
just that we can say these things to folks that we have relationship with. So relationship is key. It really is key. And we need to be our authentic selves as coaches. And we have to remember that. And we need to not get upset if they get upset at our question. So there's
Mm,
lots of work. Like it's a new relationship on both sides.
absolutely. And I think you're hitting on a great point, that a distinction I draw between coaching and, say, consulting, where consulting would be more of that one and done project based relationship. You may end up going to the same firm over and over for different things or similar things, but in the end, it's transactional. Whereas a coaching relationship, it is about building relationships of trust, because, like you're saying, the real change happens when someone that you trust, has your best interests in mind, can say the thing that may challenge you, but may also be the catalyst for the needed change.
Exactly. And this is why in my main program, I work with women on a 12-month basis. So we
Hmm.
work together very, very intimately. I'm available for them like quite a bit in this program, and I only accept like a small amount of folks. And we have 2 one-to-one retreats a year. So we can really hash out some things and we get together and do that face to face because we can't always meet face to face. Right now, none of my clients are in the city that I live in. So it's it's a beautiful way to get to know people, and it really allows us both to have that comfort level and to build that relationship.
Working with women, what would you say are some of your client experiences in getting to be that trusted advisor, as it were? What outcomes have come from that kind of relationship?
I'd say because I focus a lot on systemic barriers, and because women face systemic barriers and haven't historically been in these leadership roles in these bigger organizations and corporations, they often can be the only one on a leadership team. And so they often feel like they're not being listened to. They feel like they have to, speak louder and be more, quote, aggressive when men aren't called aggressive. Men are called assertive. Oh, he really knows what he's doing. He's such a good he's such a good boss. He tells us how it is. When women, quote, tell us how it is, people are, they sometimes they get up in arms. So it's about working with women and talking about those things. So we talk about what it is, what are the barriers they're facing in their work as that generally sole woman in that leadership role, in that on that leadership team, I should say. And then we talk about her roles in her family and the messages that she was brought up with in her family, throughout her life in school, and just so on and so forth. And so that comes up in many different ways, but mainly it's really they all express the messages that they were told how to be a girl from a very young age and how that's played now into their role as this leader.
Hmm. One metaphor I have received about the difference between coaching and therapy is like this. You say therapy is like archaeology and coaching is like architecture. And what I'm hearing is a lot of the work you're doing is that archaeological, the digging up why are things the way they are. How would you describe taking the discovery of why things are the way they are and then moving it towards their stated goals?
That's a perfect question. So I really like that metaphor. I've never heard that before, but it really makes sense. And so when we can pick these things out from our past, and our past is, as late as a minute ago, right? So everything that's happened to us and all these experiences, once we can highlight those and define those and name those, we can then plunk those experiences into now, into their role, and see how this has affected them and impacted their life as a leader, and how to move forward from that. Okay, you're not your past. That happened to you, but you're not your past. And that barrier, let's jump into that, see where that brings us, and let it go and move forward. And it's very successful. It's very successful. Being able to work with women in this way, again, developing the relationship. And that's, again, what it's all about. They come out with, it's like a weight is lifted off their shoulders. They've come out of
Hmm.
this with feeling like they don't have to be the boss, but just lead and guide. and being more comfortable in that role as that leader. It's
Wow.
pretty magical.
Yeah. One thing, my wife Miranda and I, we talk a lot about our different perspectives, and me as a man, she as a woman, and I've learned a lot from her perspective related to all this. Let's say more broadly, we can talk conceptually about people adopting either an outer, we say it, a locus of control, or an inner locus of control, meaning the things that have the most say over my life are either outside of me or within me. And what I'm hearing you say is that we're taking the things that have happened that we don't necessarily have control over as it was, but we do have control over what we're going to do about it now. Help me connect those two.
So there could be a situation where somebody grew up with, an alcoholic parent, and that was a very traumatizing experience for them in a variety of ways. Not being able to trust when that caregiver would feed them, trust when that caregiver would be nice to them or be mean to them. And I'm just using soft terms when I say nice and mean.
Sure. Sure.
And maybe they had to, maybe they're the oldest child, maybe they had to take care of their younger siblings, become parentified from a very young age and take care of other people. So that takes a toll. That takes a toll on women. It takes a toll on anybody, but women are then forced into these caregiving roles as they age. So that will continue throughout their lives, where they always need to take care of others. And in that, what they do is they often aren't taught, because they've never been told that they're allowed to take care of themselves. So throughout this process, we can go back and look at what situation got them there, and we can give them the permission to take care of themselves, go easy on themselves, just as they needed when they were that little person with all that responsibility, just as they have taken care of others along their journey as a teenager, as a young woman, and to know that the people that they're working with are also adults. So they don't need to take care of them in that same way. So a lot of folks who grow up with trauma, they feel like they need to control things because they couldn't control their environment when they were young. So
Mm-hmm.
when we go into these leadership positions and we're going in with this sense of this need for control, that's not going to work out very well,
Hmm.
because people don't want to be controlled when they go into a job. They want to be led, but they want to have autonomy. And this, when I'm working with folks and we're dealing with this, and again, going back to an alcoholic parent, because it really does, it changes the way that we see adults sometimes, because
Hmm.
these were the people that were responsible for taking care of us when we were little. So now we feel like we felt like we needed to control them then, and we couldn't. We had no control. And that often comes in when we're adults and we see other people. And these are other adults that they're working with. Sometimes they're youth, but either way, we feel like we need to control. So it's about taking this. And I feel like I'm going on a tangent. And so we take this, and we never know what's going to happen because we couldn't control it then. So let's take this and see where you're at, what you're doing, what your patterns are, why they're there, where they came from, and name them. Name them, and we can heal from them. We can keep them there. We can let them stay this barrier for us forever, or we can work to go past them. And when we work to go past them, we can look at that little child and talk about what it is that they needed at that time and really get into that need for safety and security at that time, and then bring it back to now. You are safe and you're secure now. You're not that little child hoping that your parent is going to be sober, hoping that they're going to treat you right today, and just always being afraid. So now you're not, because you're not in that situation anymore.
Hmm.
So that allows folks to really see the difference from back then until now, instead of just having these holding on to these old ways that are no longer serving us, because we're no longer in that mode of trying to survive.
Right. And I like what you're saying there in terms of bringing in a coach, having someone who can walk you through where you're at, where you want to go, and what's keeping you from getting there, and then helping you bridge that gap. I find the opportunity to challenge assumptions is one of the great pleasures of being a coach and being on the receiving end of coaching. It may not feel great in the moment every time, but I find irony in life and in our personal experiences to be extremely fascinating. For example, along the lines of what you were saying, I've observed that there can be some, we can say women broadly, but let's just say there's a subset of humanity that will prioritize taking care of others at the expense of their own needs. And when they become aware of that, I've seen a knee jerk reaction being, well, if I'm going to bring myself out of that extreme, what's the opposite of taking care of others? Well, it's being selfish. And so they place a negative judgment on balancing out those extremes. What have you seen there, and how have you addressed it?
And people will call themselves selfish because other people will call them selfish when they do take that time. So I'm glad you brought that
Mm,
up, because it is a big piece. It's a big piece of why people don't want to take that time for themselves. And and it really is coaching folks through their past experiences. Well, why do you think this? Right? Continuously questioning, because they have the answers. They're the experts in their own lives. And the messages that they get that have told them that they can't take that time for themselves is exactly that they're being selfish. But how do we really care for others in a genuine way if we don't know how to take care of ourselves? If we never take care of ourselves, how can we be there for others? We won't have anything left, or we're not going to do it in a way that isn't causing harm.
I'll say as a personal example, in in a relationship, dyad, sometimes we call it, two people. Well, I'll take my wife and I for example. It can seem so obvious and natural for me to make sure that I'm fed, make sure that I'm well rested. For We have two young kids. For my wife, sometimes it's a challenge to make sure that she's feeding herself throughout the day because she's doing all these other things to make sure that she's getting the rest she needs. Even if I'm able to take the kids in the morning and give her a little bit extra. So when we are observing others, it can seem so obvious what it is they need to do. How can a coach, how does a coaching relationship differ from someone who's not neutral or necessarily interested in your best interests, who would just give you the advice flat out or like just tell you what to do?
So Are you looking for tips on how to tell your wife to take care of herself?
Yeah, let's keep
That
it
works
grounded in
too.
that example.
Yeah, without getting in trouble.
Right. Because it
Right.
can be so easy for me, for a husband to just say, "Well, eat." But they're not. They won't.
Yeah, because that's a different relationship, right? And sometimes they don't want to hear that from someone who's close to them. So you could tell her the same thing that I could tell her, and she's going to be offended when you say it, but not offended when I say it. And this comes down to relationship. And it doesn't mean that you two don't have a close relationship. It just it depends on the relationship. And sometimes we don't want to be told by our partners that we need to eat because I know I'm an adult. I know I need to eat. I don't need my partner to tell me I need to eat. That's a tricky one. So for a coach, so what I do is I talk to them about what's going on for them, and they end up telling me about, so we start with work, and then we go into what it is that their patterns are, or their routines are at home, and that would come up. So I would say, okay, so when you're making dinner and Sam is eating and the kids are eating and whatnot, what are you doing? Oh, I'm cleaning up. Okay, so that would come up right there. And it depends what people are saying that they're struggling with. So it might not come up, but I think it would, because if it was an area that did cause friction, for example, if you did say to her, you know, I think you should eat, no matter what way you say it. And if she took it as a way that she was offended by your question, she would say that in a session. She would say, it's frustrating to me when Sam tells me what to do. Well, how does he tell you what to do? He tells me to eat. Okay, so why does he tell you to eat? Why is he telling you to eat? Are you not eating? And it would come up. I don't know if there's an answer for you specifically to be able to say that to her in a way that she's not taking it offensively. That's a whole other conversation, because it is about your relationship, right? Of course. And that it would get to that. She said, I blew up at Sam when he said that to me. Then I'd say, okay, why would you blow up at him for telling you to eat? Because he wants you to, like, what is it hurting you that he's telling you to eat? Is it hurting you that he wants you to eat? Is eating going to hurt you? No, you need it for survival. So we would talk about things in a way where it would provoke a conversation for her to come back to you and talk about it afterwards, and then you would have that conversation. So because we get into so many deep areas wherever there's conflict and barriers in people's lives, these areas do end up being softened and thought about, and and taken steps intentionally to do things different. And this is when we're dealing with people who want to do the work. So when I talk about working with high achieving women, it's because they've gotten to a level in their lives where they're ready to do the work. Folks don't get to a high achieving level without being ready to do some type of work.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought this back out. So let's broaden it, because we can talk about a marriage relationship, but even more broadly within a management team, between two executives, you can have a very familiar relationship, but not necessarily have the trust to point out things that the other's observing. Another person may be very aware of a blind spot of mine that they can see is actively holding me back from the outcomes I want to get to. But there may not be the trust to facilitate that true communication to make a change, which, again, like we're saying here, is one of the great benefits of a coach, because they can facilitate that conversation. Hmm.
And chaos, right? So if folks are dealing with a high degree of chaos in either their job or their life, like their home life, or both, they're not as willing to open up.
Mm,
So that's getting folks ready to even receive coaching. That can be a struggle. So
mm,
like I just think of myself when I've been in situations where I felt like lots of overwhelm and you came to me and said, Darlene, you need to eat. I might not take that favorably, whether we're best
mm,
friends or not, right? So we don't want to hear that when we're not in a good space. So it really is, again, not only, I shouldn't say again, because I didn't say this before, but it's not only about relationships, but it's about being aware of where somebody is at and being able to get in there in different ways, because we can do that when we don't have a relationship with somebody. We can do that when we
mm,
see somebody on the street, right? There like, if think about if there's an altercation on the street and somebody comes in to talk somebody down, there's conflict management. So that's also part of this. If there is more friction in an organization or a corporation, if the management team isn't getting along and they really want someone to come in and to like do this huge amount of work. I mean, it's always a huge amount of work, but in a conflict situation, it's it's a lot harder. So when we go in
mm.
that way, there's lots and lots and lots of pieces to really think about and be very careful with. And so now I'm saying
Yeah,
that and I feel like I'm opening the floodgates to a whole other situation. That is a whole other conversation.
sure. Well, I'm glad you bring this up. Let me put a twist on what you said and ask you, having a coach, bringing in someone to in a coaching capacity, one of the benefits is having a fresh set of eyes that isn't marred with all of these maybe past negative experiences that color the relationship and make things more chaotic. What benefits have your clients seen in bringing in that fresh set of eyes that you offer?
So that I would say the answer is twofold. Sometimes organizations aren't ready for it. So that's the
Mm,
short answer is sometimes you can go in and come in, see that, identify it and come forward with a plan and they're still not ready for it. There's not a lot, but there have been times where I've had to say this isn't going to work. But when it is going to work, it's a beautiful thing. So coming in and saying exactly that, the fresh set of eyes, we know this, right? I shouldn't say we know this. People know a lot of things that they forget due to a variety of situations. And if it is a chaotic situation or a crisis situation like this, sometimes any level of rational thinking is out the door, even with the smartest people or the most
yeah.
trained people. And we see this, I'll just say on a side note, we see this sometimes when we go home to our families for Christmas, right? So we know even as practitioners that some relationships can get quite tricky and trigger us. So in those situations, if we can talk about what those triggers are and if we can talk about what the plan is, then and folks are open to it, then we can really get in there and dive deep. And depending on the size of the organization or the size of the management team, it might need several coaches. So
Sure.
going in, because if you're the sole person coaching all these people and it's a chaotic environment, I wouldn't recommend it. I haven't done that.
Mm,
I'll bring in other
mm,
folks that I know and contract other folks to come in on the project with me. So with this in mind, and what you're talking about, it can be done, but it has to be very strategic and we need buy-in, right? For me to do my
mm,
job, you need to do your job, and vice versa. So are folks committed? Are they willing to work towards the same goal? And frankly, some folks aren't coachable. We know this, and I'll walk away from
mm.
those clients if that's the case.
Sure. what are some things that you look for or have observed your clients, prospects looking for when it comes to assessing coachee fit?
So if it's a let's talk in two different ways. So if it's a group situation, like a team, it's coming into the room and first assessing people's literal body language. How are they
Mm,
communicating with other people just by their body language? Because that's what we see first. We notice people's body language. So if they're open, if their body language is open in a way that isn't full of bravado, because sometimes people's postures are full of bravado, we know that that's going to be a more difficult sell. And then when they speak, it it says that, right? What they the words they use and the tones they use can be less believing that this would be something that would help their team and help them. So that's always a little more difficult because you also don't want to call that person out in that group setting because that isn't going to go
mm,
well. Of course, I mean, could you
mm,
imagine? So we don't do that. And just it really depends. It depends on the situation. So if that person who is not believing, if they are, the highest in the hierarchy, that's going to be complicated. But I would have a closed conversation with them afterwards, like a personal conversation with them afterwards. Okay, so I noticed this in the meeting, and this is you called me in to do this with your team, and this is what I felt, and this is what I saw in this meeting. So do you really want me here? Why did you call me in? And not in a way to put them on the spot, but to really have that open conversation with them. I need to know why I'm here. Because if this is the feeling that I'm getting from you, how is this ever going to work? So
mm,
sometimes it works
mm.
out well and sometimes it doesn't. I feel like there's another piece of your question that I'm missing.
Yeah. What have you observed with prospects who come to you? What are they looking for in you? How does that look?
Yeah, so it's been word of mouth. So I don't have like
Mm,
a big social media presence. I don't have, you know, lead magnets and whatnot. And in these types of situations, it's mostly been about word or through word of mouth. And when folks have come to me in that way, it is often in a very positive manner because they've already been had that okay from somebody else. So they'll come to me and they'll say, you know what,
mm,
I'm dealing with this, and this, and uh, I want to, I want my management team to be more cohesive. That's a big one, is having their management team be more cohesive. Another one is with smaller management teams, like for nonprofit organizations, for example, they don't have a big budget for directors and executives. So they have an executive director and they have managers in different areas or coordinators in different areas. So that's more tricky because folks in a nonprofit situation, in a nonprofit organization, they'll be taking on a lot more than what's offered in a corporate situation because corporate has more money. So now in
mm,
nonprofit, people feel overworked. They're getting asked to do several jobs. There was one place that I worked with where the HR manager was also the finance manager. So
mm,
people are just they're taking on too much and they're being asked to take on too much because it's a nonprofit. So it really depends on the situation, but those people will have come in, and I'm thinking of one place. So they came in and they said, you know what, I heard about you through this. I would like you to work with my team and just come in and work with each coordinator and manager as well as the team as a group so we can work more cohesively and we can dispel any myths or worries that folks have, because often, again, in nonprofit, people are working from like a scarcity standpoint, and it doesn't
Hmm.
have to be that way. We don't have to always be focusing on funders and numbers, where they do, but we don't want people worrying about that all the time when they have to give their statistics every month for their program to be able to
Hmm.
get that funding from whoever it is who's funding them, whether it be stakeholders, like private stakeholders or government or whatnot. So how do we do this in a way where we're still a team and we can work together? So it's it's really working with where they're at and asking the right questions. And sometimes those questions just come up in conversation.
Hmm.
I'll have like my standard questions, my standard 3 questions. And of course, like this, like a podcast interview, you could have a standard 3 questions, but it turns into whatever, wherever it goes.
Right. Well, now I'm curious. What are those questions that you tend to ask?
Ah, yeah, I knew that was the next question. So the first one would be, who, like, so for a nonprofit, for example, I would say, like, who is on your management team? What does your management team look like? And that includes, do you have an assistant? Because again, a lot of nonprofits, the executive director doesn't even have an assistant, and they are, juggling so many balls at once. So it's about knowing who their management team is, knowing what their roles are, who they're responsible for, knowing. And then the next question is, who are their funders? Who are they responsible to? And that includes board members. And then the next question would be, just what their objectives are for this coaching relationship. So what is it that they want to see? So it really is a really small amount of questions to start with, and of course that turns into very long conversations and lots more questions.
Sure. Well, right. I mean, with those 3 questions, you can set the chessboard, as it were, and see how everything is set up. But obviously, that'll get you 80% of the way there, and then the remaining 20% is why it's not working. And there's all sorts of conversations around that. Wow.
That's right. And the questions
So,
are same as, sorry, the questions are same as in corporate. It's just,
hmm,
yeah, the stakeholder and board questions are a little bit more in depth.
sure. Wow. Well, here on the Courage Coach for Executives podcast, our word is courage. So I'm curious to know what courage means to you.
Mm. The I think the biggest piece for courage is believing in ourselves, believing in
Mm-hmm.
ourselves to be able to get to where we want to, be able to let go of old patterns, be able to ask for help when we need it. But it starts with us. We need to have courage and we need to believe in ourselves.
I love that. And in fact, one of my common ways to sign off on episodes is to say it starts with you, because it very much is an individual effort. For all the help and support and systems that we exist within, this really is a one player game. And there's so much that we can do. Let me follow up though. Why does that take courage to believe in ourselves?
Hmm. It's all those messages that we've gotten. It's all those negative messages. We start off in school, we go to track meets, we go to gym, we play sports, and there's always a winner and a loser. So believing in ourselves and having courage in ourselves, and it's hard when we've been indoctrinated from a very young age to compete with others and there being a winner and loser, and it doesn't need to be that way.
Hmm. And if you were to say, what your one word or one phrase would be that really encapsulates what you're all about, what would you say?
Shed the shit.
Hmm.
Shed the shit. Let it go. You know, we always have a new opportunity to start fresh again in this moment, all the time, as long as we are breathing and living. Just shed the shit and take a step forward.
Hmm. Well, one of my last questions I have for you is probably just to expand on that, because I want to give you the opportunity. What's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from the conversation we've had?
That they can do it. They really
Hmm.
can. Everybody has it within them. Even in the times that I've felt that I couldn't move forward in different situations, it really literally is about shedding the shit. We need to believe in ourselves. We need to let it go just for a moment, even if it's just in that moment to pick up the phone or make that phone call and to ask for help from somebody else, to take that step forward. It really is everything that you said, having courage. It's like everything, shedding it, moving forward, and believing in ourselves, because everybody has the capacity and the capability to do it. And once they believe in themselves, they can. They really can.
Hmm. Darlene, is there anything that remains to be said?
I think you've asked a lot of questions, and you've really been able to pull things out that has covered a lot of areas. So thank you so much for this. I appreciate this opportunity and everything that you've pulled out in this conversation and the questions that you asked. And I'm feeling really good about this.
Of course. Great. Glad to hear. If people wanted to learn more about you, Darlene, and maybe work with you closer, how can they get in touch with you?
They can go to my website. It's darlenemeissner.com, DarleneMeissner.com. I'm also
Fantastic.
on social media.
Okay. That's where, yeah, we found each other on Facebook. So
That's
please,
right.
everyone, connect with Darlene. She has a lot to offer, especially for those who at all resonated with the things she had to say. But I'm Sam, the Courage Coach for Executives, and I'm here to remind you, it starts with you.